Hey kids, happy summertime! Welcome to the summer slide. This year's summer slide is going to work a little differently than what you may have remembered last year. There will be some stories that are going to be shared with older kids, upper elementary kids, and then we have some stories that are read for early elementary kids. And we have all kinds of teachers from Rose Park and Southside and Pine Ridge and Forest School. Some of them read in English. We have Spanish immersion stories. Dr. Forsyth, our new head of schools, is even going to read a story to you at some point in the summer. So I'm going to be emailing you a link to a story probably about twice a week, maybe a little more frequently than that. And we are working on getting stacks of paper books, but they would be at your reading level, and I'm hoping maybe by the end of June that we can get those books to you. So stay tuned, I'll have more info. My story that I wanted to share with you is hot off the presses. In fact, it hasn't even reached the presses yet. J.K. Rowling is a very beloved author. She wrote the whole book series of Harry Potter. Some of you may be familiar with that book. She wrote a story, years ago, but she kept it in her attic, in her house. And as we all went into quarantine, J.K. Rowling went into her attic and she took that book back out. And she is releasing several chapters every few days. I am reading the story to the kids in our family, and it is awesome. We are up to chapter 10. Before I read a chapter to see if I can get you hooked in the story, I also wanted to tell you that she has a competition going. She is inviting kids to participate in her illustration competition. So why don't I tell you what this website is where you can find the story. The name of the book is The Ichabog, and the website where you can find her story is, all one word, theichabog.com. And when you go to that page, you see the story chapter by chapter that she's continually adding to, and you also see the competition for the illustrations. So I think what an awesome opportunity to read a brand new story. It will be released in paper form, she thinks, about in November. But if you want to get a jump start, it is available at theichabog.com. So I'm going to read to you, it's hard to see on this screen, sorry. Chapter 1, King Fred the Fearless. So again, the name of this book is called The Ichabog. Bog, B-O-G, in the end. Some of you might know what a bog is. This is called The Ichabog, and we have chapter 1 called King Fred the Fearless. Right away, it makes me think either King Fred is super brave, or King Fred the Fearless, is it something that's the very opposite? Like it's ironic that his name is King Fred the Fearless. Let's find out. Once upon a time, there was a tiny country called Cornucopia, which had been ruled for centuries by a long line of fair-haired kings. The king at the time of which I write was called King Fred the Fearless. He'd announced the fearless bit about himself on the morning of his coronation, partly because it sounded nice with Fred, but also because he'd once managed to catch and kill a wasp all by himself, if you didn't count 5 footmen and the boot boy. Oh, okay. So, King Fred the Fearless killed a wasp with help. That makes me know, okay, so there's some humor here. King Fred the Fearless is an ironic name. Let's see if she builds on that a little bit. King Fred the Fearless came to the throne on a huge wave of popularity. He had lovely golden curls, fine sweeping mustaches, and looked magnificent in the tight breeches, velvet doublets, and ruffled shirts that rich men wore at the time. Fred was said to be generous, smiled, and waved whenever anyone caught sight of him, and looked awfully handsome in the portraits that were distributed throughout the kingdom. To be hung in town halls. The people of Cornucopia were most happy with their new king, and many thought he'd end up being even better at the job than his father, Richard the Righteous, whose teeth, though nobody liked to mention it at the time, were rather crooked. King Fred was secretly relieved to find out how easy it was to rule Cornucopia. In fact, the country seemed to run itself. Nearly everybody had lots of food, the merchants made pots of gold, and Fred's advisors took care of any little problem that arose. All that was left for Fred to do was to beam at his subjects whenever he went out in his carriage and go hunting 5 times a week with his 2 best friends, Lord Spittleworth and Lord Flapoon. Spittleworth and Flapoon had large estates of their own in the country, but they found it much cheaper and more amusing to live at the palace with the king, eating his food, hunting his stags, and making sure that the king didn't get too fond of any of the beautiful ladies at court. They had no wish to see Fred married, because a queen might spoil all their fun. For a time, Fred had seemed to rather like Lady Islanda, who was as dark and beautiful as Fred was fair and handsome. But Spittleworth had persuaded Fred that she was far too serious and bookish for the country to love her as a queen. Fred didn't know that Lord Spittleworth had a grudge against Lady Islanda. He'd once asked her to marry him, but she'd turned him down. Wow, what kind of a person is Lord Spittleworth? Is he filled with honor, with genuine allegiance to this country? Or is he selfish and looking for the easy way out? Yeesh, let's see. Lord Spittleworth was very thin, cunning, and clever. His friend Flapoon was ruddy-faced and so enormous that it required 6 men to heave him onto his massive chestnut horse. Though not as clever as Spittleworth, Flapoon was still far sharper than the king. Oh boy. Both lords were experts at flattery and pretending to be astonished by how good Fred was at everything, from riding to tiddlywinks. If Spittleworth had a particular talent, it was persuading the king to do things that suited Spittleworth. And if Flapoon had a gift, it was for convincing the king that nobody on earth was as loyal to the king as his 2 best friends. I'm going to stop reading the story here. If you have a device at home, would you ask your parents if you could access the Ichabod? At this point, J.K. Rowling has released through chapter 10. So I have read this story to our family through chapter 10, and there are some very fascinating, humorous character developments that are happening with King Fred the Fearless, Spittleworth and Flapoon, as well as other people throughout the country. I will tell you that the Ichabod is a legend in this country of Cornucopia, and the characters are trying to discover and decide if Ichabod is truly a creature or is it just a fable. In the meantime, I'd like to share with you, if you can see these, some of the illustrations that have already been submitted by kids to J.K. Rowling. And kids, I think this would be something pretty cool to work on. Your parents can get the instructions on how to submit your illustrations to the competition. So, Consider yourself invited to read The Ichabod by J.K. Rowling, her newest book, not even released yet, and see if you want to participate in the illustration competition. Let's have a great summer together reading books, kids.